like to give you my perspective on Deflategate, both historically and philosophically, to some degree legally, although again I defer. I'm sitting next to the world's leading law and sport person, so I certainly should defer, although as I say, we don't see it identically.
Which is good.
My view is that part of Deflategate comes from the historical context of resentment against the Patriots. Much of the sport is designed to get fair advantages through deception. The question of the week before was that an unfair advantage? Now, it was definitely good gamesmanship, and it was not cheating because it did not violate rules. Belichick prides himself on being a gamesman. And so I too felt some of that resentment, but that's part of the background. That if the Patriots don't cheat, at the very least what they do is undermine the sport through gamesmanship, through being clever by half, through Belichick finding the hidden loophole in the rules and then forcing the league to change those rules, which they have changed for this year. I just want to emphasize to you the second part, the sequence, because to me, that's the most consequential and glaring probable fraud and dishonesty involved in the factuality of Deflategate. Everyone agrees as to the first event. Patriots balls measured. All found below the 12.5 minimum, of course. Set at the legal minimum, exposed in 71 degrees, exposed for 2 hours to cold, wet weather. Of course they're all going to be below the legal minimum. They have to be. They have to be. Take your tires on a car, right? Set your air pressure at the lowest safe pressure. Leave it out in the cold overnight. Start your car the next morning. Your light's going to go on, your warning light. If you've got a good car and it gives you your tire pressure, and you can read it, you're going to read your tire pressure. They're all going to be below the legal, the safe minimum. Of course. The ideal gas law will do the same thing to tires as it will do to football. Of course it will. So, 3 events happen, and everybody agrees as to the first event. Patriots balls are measured. Then 2 events happen. Colts balls are measured. Patriots balls are reinflated. That's how Exponent presents it as more likely than not. Patriots balls measured, Colts balls measured, Patriots balls reinflated, second half begins. There are only a couple of problems with that, however. Number 1, only 4 Colts balls were measured. Why were only 4 Colts balls measured? Obviously, because they were running out of time. In fact, the second half started 1 minute late. They only have 15 minutes. So they had to stop after measuring 4. So why would they know to stop after measuring 4 if they still had to reinflate all 11 Patriots balls that measured below the minimum 12.5? How would they know to stop at 4? Why not 3? Why not 5? Plausible would be that that was the last of the 3 events. But wait, there's more. Somehow, recall, the 2 officials who were measuring the balls using the referee's 2 gauges, the logo and the non-logo gauge, who had never used those gauges before and are not sensitive to the difference between the 2 gauges, somehow, after measuring the 11 Patriots balls, they switched gauges. And nobody noticed it. Now, none of the 4 recalled or noticed that they had switched gauges. That is, I measured with one of the 2 gauges, you measured with the other one, the Patriots balls, then we switched gauges when we measured the 4 Colts balls. How can we switch gauges and nobody remembers my handing to you saying, why don't you take my gauge and I'll take yours for the Colts balls? First of all, why would you switch gauges? It makes no sense. Why would you want them? And B, if you didn't want them for some reason, how could you not notice it? And how could you not remember it? Well, the only plausible reason that I can come up with as to how they didn't notice or remember that they switched gauges was they put down the gauges to do something else. What else? Reinflate the Patriots balls. It would be the obvious thing to do next after they measure the 11 Patriots balls, which is the main concern and purpose for their being there at halftime. After they measure 11 Patriots balls and see that all of them are below 12.5, they're all too underinflated. Of course, their next thing would be to reinflate them to 13.0, the mid-range. To reinflate them, they have to put down the needles, the gauges. They put down the gauges. Then they reinflated 11 Patriots balls. Then they start measuring the Colts balls to see if they got a problem with the Colts balls also. They pick up the gauges without realizing that they've switched the gauges, and they hastily start measuring the Colts balls. But they're looking, and they're feverishly late, and they know it because halftime is due to begin, and this is the AFC Championship game with all the media attention and television, etc., and the timing. What difference does it make? Huge. Because, remember, the second claim is, even if we can explain how much the pressure in the Patriots' balls dropped, even if science could explain it, which you can once you realize the gauge switch, you can't explain why the Patriots' balls should have dropped more than the Colts' balls, which means that the pressure is expanding in the warmth as they resume their close to 71-degree locker room temperature. Therefore, since the Patriots' balls are measured at right when they come in from the field, but the Colts balls have been given 7 minutes to warm up, of course the Patriots balls pressure dropped more than the Colts balls pressure, because the Colts balls had re-warmed up with the pressure having risen closer to the initial setting, whereas the Patriots balls pressure was closer to the field condition drop. So of course that happens. That doesn't show deflation, human intervention. To the contrary, science explains it. And what I think the ethos that's being violated is the ethos of honesty and investigation. And even if, let's look at some of the things they did. Where is it absolutely prohibited that if somebody leaks misinformation, you don't correct it for 7 weeks? You know that that's what happened, right? The initial leak came from the NFL.
11 or 12 footballs.
Right. Were more than two or more PSI below the legal minimum. That was false. The NFL knew within hours that that was false. They allowed the public dialogue and perception to harden that the Patriots cheated, because it was res ipsa loquitur, right? The thing spoke for itself. If all of the Patriots footballs were substantially below the legal minimum, how else could you explain it but cheating?
I mean, assuming that, you know, this is true and things were done on purpose, what does the NFL get out of punishing Tom Brady by taking out arguably one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, removing him from the field for 4 games? What does that do for the NFL? What does the NFL get out of trying to prosecute and punish Tom Brady for this? I don't get, you know, where the NFL, like what the NFL's motive is for people who say the NFL has an agenda against the Patriots. Well, what does the NFL get from it?
A fine question. I'll tell you what Goodell gets out of it. No, I can't prove this, but you ask what I think was going on. The other owners apparently deeply resented the Patriots from a business perspective, as I mentioned earlier. They were bad for business, bad for the league by dominating a division year after year after year. That included 2 more major markets of New York and Miami. Furthermore, resented the apparent close relationship of Goodell with Kraft. So that Goodell had every incentive to prove to the owners that he could and would discipline the Patriots significantly and was in no way in Kraft's back pocket. Therefore, when this happened, and the Patriots, I believe that Goodell believed that this happened, that Deflategate was real initially. I believe he believed it. It would be good if it were true, and gave him the occasion to prove to the other owners that he could discipline the Patriots and really stick it to them and inflict a significantly painful sanction. And so being invested initially in the truthfulness of it, being supported by the owners themselves in the hope that it was true because they resented the Patriots, and not only would they get their comeuppance, but furthermore, the loss of a first-round draft pick, which under salary cap regulations would mean that they would lose a star player that they could easily afford to have and not so easily afford to do without, would tend to enforce parity, drop the Patriots down with their aging quarterback to equal to the rest of the pack in the Eastern Division, and no longer have them dominate. Therefore, the league, in terms of business, would gain. Goodell would gain in the eyes of the other NFL owners by proving he could come down hard and heavy on the Patriots. He would help shore up his job prospects of continuing in the position that he's in. And so he had every incentive to do it. It came out of the frustration that there were really 3 voices to be heard, and only 2 of them were officially coming from the parties. One was affirm, the other was reverse, but the third was remand. That is, the facts matter, the truth matters. Did it ever happen? If the amicus brief, if the judges pay attention to the amicus, and they seriously consider that the integrity of the game includes the process of determining the integrity of the game or sport, then they will remand for the factual determination that this has never had. The reason they've never determined factually what happened, in my view, was because the NFLPA's counsel, nominally representing Brady, was really much more focused on restricting the power of the commissioner than he was on determining and establishing the innocence of Brady, that it never happened. So it's really never had its day in court, its factual determination in court. Imagine that at least one of the 3 judges comes to the conclusion that, if we want to talk law for a minute, under the leading Supreme Court standard from the amicus brief, MISCO, M-I-S-C-O, the leading case, which the NFL cites, I recounted it, I think I said in the brief 15 times, it's I think 19 times or 20 times. Under the leading standard, although there is ordinary deference to the decision-making on the part of the arbitrator, that the federal courts should defer to the decision. The one exception is evident partiality, bias, or fraud, all 3 of which took place in my view, which the amicus tends to establish, and attempts to establish. Assuming one of the judges is persuaded that there is at least a reasonable possibility, if not a preponderant probability, that there was evident partiality, bias, and fraud that infected this investigation from start to finish, and that judge wants to remand, thinks that the appropriate outcome of this contest is neither to affirm the district court reversal of Brady's 4-game sanction, nor is it to reverse that district court and reinstitute the 4-game sanction. It is rather to send it back to the district court for a full and fair hearing as to what did in fact happen, and whether the conclusion of the Wells report, the central conclusion from which the NFL has essentially run away, that science cannot explain it, is itself thoroughly bankrupt, that science fully explains it, that the outside report by exponent, the PhD physicists and statisticians, is itself subject to serious attack and infected with bias from start to finish. Send it back for the factual hearing so the public can finally determine whether Deflategate ever happened. Suppose one of the 3 judges feels that way and says, yes, this is a 3-way conversation. There really are 3 options. 1 reverse, 1 affirm, but 1 remand for the full and fair hearing. Okay, now imagine they gather for their decision. They will, and they'll discuss it. Suppose the preliminary vote is 1-1-1, not 2-1, as the media tends to emphasize, or 3-0. Suppose it's 1-1-1. 1 for affirmance, 1 for reversal, 1 for remand. Now what happens? Let's project the game. If the judge that wants to remand holds firm, then the NFL, pro-NFL judge reasons as follows. If I lose this, if I really force him, if I don't join him, and I force him to take sides, and he takes the other side, and instead votes to affirm, so it's a 2-1 decision to affirm, well, that's a terrible position. We've lost. The NFL, in fact, the basic principle that the arbitrator's judgment should be final, including its factual judgment, except in extraordinary circumstances, that basic principle will have been undermined, and the courts will now start being pressured to get involved when Congress's intent was clear, which is arbitration is the product of contract. The parties contracted to this. The courts are not to be used to review the arbitrator's decision-making except in extraordinary circumstances not present here. That essential principle will have been fundamentally undermined. So I feel pressure, I pro-NFL judge. Given the threat that the remand judge, the 1-1, the one in the middle, 1-1-1, the middle one, will go with the reversing judge for reversal, I feel pressure to join to remand. From the perspective of the reversing, the judge who wants reversed has to reason as follows with the symmetrical threat. If I don't join the remand judge and he's forced to take sides, he might take the side of the pro-NFL judge, in which case Brady is stuck with a 4-game suspension that he probably doesn't deserve from an outrageous process that should never be allowed. I don't want Brady to be stuck with a 4-game suspension that he doesn't deserve. How unjust that would be. So if forced then to decide whether to hold firm and risk the remand judge siding with the NFL, reversing the decision, I'll go with remand. There's a possibility, therefore, that if the remand judge holds out strongly enough, he can actually get both extremes to join him, and it could conceivably be a 3-0 decision as a compromise decision to remand.
It cannot end up 1-1-1, just to
Right.
be clear. So there has to be eventually either a 2-1 or 3-0.
Right, that's not a stopping point. On the other hand, notice that both extremes have something in common. They both want this decision to be expeditedly decided and have it over and done. They just fundamentally disagree as to what the decision should be, what the outcome should be, but they both agree it should be quick. Remember that the NFL and the NFLPA both agreed to an expedited appeal. That's why it came up relatively quickly by judicial standards. So they have in common, let's decide it quickly, whereas remand drags it out,
Right.
which neither side wants. But both sides prefer, I think, to the adverse verdict, assuming it is 1-1-1. So we got a very interesting game going on if it is 1-1-1. The fact that the newly inflated footballs made no difference does not in any way, in my view, detract from the claim that if they were artificially deflated below the legal minimum initially, although it made no difference to the score, it would still constitute cheating. And it would still constitute an attack on the integrity of the game. The NFL would be right. It doesn't make any difference that it made no difference.
Should that make a difference, though, with the penalty?
If Brady's conscious objective was to cause those footballs to be deflated, then in my view, it's as serious as it would be whether or not the footballs were deflated, and whether or not if they were deflated, it made any difference in the score. Statements which in isolation are true, but in context and pragmatically are false, carefully constructed to mislead the public, is to violate the integrity of the sport when you are yourself tasked with determining what happened. And then to hire your law firm to conduct the so-called investigation and then hide the investigation notes under lawyer-client confidentiality privilege, to have a partner in that law firm as one of the investigators now becoming the prosecutor in the appellate hearing of the commissioner, and cross-examining Brady, to yourself sit as the appellate judge over your own earlier decision as the essentially trial judge, which is what Goodell did. He sat as the appellate judge over his own earlier decision and then escalated. and claim that this doesn't violate some deep-seated notions of fundamental fairness, of due process, of notice, and to justify it all by saying they bargained for it, so it's consistent with it, is to violate the very integrity of the sport that you claim to be upholding. And so when Goodell said, look, even if we had conducted this whole investigation in-house, even if we had never hired an outside expert, consultant, exponent, even if we hadn't done it using our law firm's members as independent investigators, we still wouldn't violate the CBA because we don't have to conduct an outside independent investigation. The whole thing could have been done in-house, which I think it effectively was done. We had that right under the contract. The argument, which I wish Kessler had made on behalf of the Brady instead of the NFLPA, is the argument with which I close with you today, which is sometimes by doing less than you might, you do more than you may. They did well more than they may. There are two senses of independence. Independent meaning sent to the outside over which we have no control, which they didn't have to do under the contract. And independent meaning full, fair, unbiased. No reasonable person can look at this process from start to finish and conclude, whatever happened, that it was full, fair, and unbiased. It was a disgrace, and it probably never happened.
Thank you.